Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now, today I want to talk a little bit about altcoin season, just because as we've seen Bitcoin move up relatively dramatically over the past couple of days, there has kind of been the question of like, all right, Bitcoin's moving, like when does alt season happen, all that type of stuff. So what I want to talk about today is concerning alt season, right? And like one of the theories, I'm not sure if this is necessarily like the most likely outcome, but I do think there's a very realistic outcome with all the development that we've seen on Bitcoin of like, maybe altcoin season is on Bitcoin, right? And so that could be kind of a really interesting thing if that were to happen. And I want to go over one of the projects that we've talked about a little bit before on the channel of one that could be a kind of a major force that allows that to happen. So anyway, let's go on ahead and dive right in. So starting out, looking at crypto bubbles, what we can see is overall pretty mixed day in the market. We did just see kind of a pretty massive move up for kind of everything. If we look at the weekly, we can see, some pretty big gainers overall, but overall kind of still relatively mixed. And then if we look at the month, same type of thing, very mixed, kind of one way or the other. We actually have kind of a tale of two markets. We can see kind of a lot of the bigger projects have actually, in altcoins, I guess we could say generally, have kind of pulled back a relatively decent chunk. And aside from maybe like, Bitcoin, Solana, Aptos, Sui, maybe a couple others, like most of it's been meme coins, right? Doge, Mog, Ape, SPX, Nero, Mew, Popcat, like there's a lot of those that have kind of been leading the market, generally showing us that like it's still pretty much kind of a Bitcoin and a meme coin type of season right now. Solana, I think, is kind of the only one that's broken that mold at least a little bit, but everything else, it's pretty much kind of been that way. We can see there's been a couple like Radium and Jupiter that are Solana-based projects that have been performing pretty well also. But overall, we're definitely still waiting for altcoin season to come. It has not shown up yet. I think we can all pretty comfortably say, if we look at the altcoin season index, we're not necessarily in Bitcoin season anymore, but we're still very, very close to Bitcoin season. Essentially how this metric works is if we look at kind of how the price moves relative, like Bitcoin compared to altcoin, and how Bitcoin compares relative to altcoins. This is kind of how we kind of get that sort of metric. And so when Bitcoin's kind of not really doing a whole lot and altcoins are, we're going to be up closer to altcoin season. And then when Bitcoin's doing a lot and altcoins are not, then we get closer down to the Bitcoin season here. And so that's kind of what we're seeing. I think it's still very much Bitcoin season, and until we see Bitcoin break all-time highs and maybe find some level of like resistance at any point kind of on its way up, we're really not going to see altcoin season. I think there's still a lot to be seen coming from Bitcoin. But what we can see, and kind of what we'll get to here in a second, is like what happens if altcoin season is just on Bitcoin, right? Because that is now, I think, for the first cycle ever, like actually a possibility. And so what we can see though, kind of before we get into that a little bit more detailed, we can see that Bitcoin has over the past couple of days just kind of rocketed up, and we're now we kind of retested this support. We've bounced off of this support, and we're kind of sitting at like the 72,000 range. We can see all-time highs here are 73,777. So yesterday we did hit 73,514. So we were just about $200 off of breaking all-time highs. What this looks like to me is it looks like, as the election gets closer and things kind of start to settle out, it looks like this could be a possibility of the crypto market at least pricing in a Trump election. Again, we don't actually know. Poll numbers are still very, very close. And so this to me seems like it may be a little bit preemptive, but I think that's kind of what the crypto market is pricing in, at least just from what I've heard and seen as like the general consensus of like Trump being the pro-crypto president, people within crypto being like very much more pro-Trump because of that. So I think this is kind of what we're seeing here. There's also been kind of a lot of consensus of like, if he is elected, like Bitcoin's going to go nuts. And so I think that this could be kind of a factor of like, as polling results have gotten better for him, the price of Bitcoin has kind of gone up in turn, because people are expecting to see that, kind of all-time highs be broken and a lot of that stuff if he does get elected. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now on the Bitcoin chart. We can see things are looking very, very strong between both, breaking and then finding support on these like new, basically turning resistances into supports. That's been really good. We've been pushing kind of overbought on the RSI indicator on the daily time frame, at least, pretty much constantly over the past like month or so. I mean, over here, like we've all been, aside from this kind of quick pullback in this area, we've all been essentially kind of pushing the top of that like overbought structure. But what we can see is when it does kind of pull back a little bit, we can see here kind of another another bit of like, I guess, bearish divergence, or I guess bullish divergence, we can see that, as price drops, the RSI cools off a lot faster than price drops. So then it allows us, because we can see both of these essentially just barely ticked over into overbought, both here and here. The only difference is this was at an a high locally here of 69,377, and this was a high of 73,514, and this is only within a week. So what we can see is that the RSI is recovering really, really quickly to kind of allow us to give that room to keep pushing up. We can see something very close here where we were sitting at highs of what is that, 66,000, and we're very, very close to overbought. And then we look up here at the highs here, and it's 69,000. So basically, we've been kind of approaching overbought at each of these points in the past, month, like week and a half, and then like yesterday. And all of these essentially have been $3,000 higher from each other, which means that there's a lot of bullish momentum and bullish sentiment within the chart. And I think that's pretty clear to see. I don't think you need to be any sort of expert to figure that out. But also looking at Bollinger Bands, we can see that, we've kind of been pushing the top of this Bollinger Band very consistently for quite a while now. It kind of remains to be seen if we kind of hold this support and kind of wait for things to happen kind of regarding the November election. I think if the November election does go for Trump, this probably will continue to move up. If it doesn't, I could see us pulling back a little bit. Again, I think this will probably just be a reactionary kind of movement. I don't think it will really have anything to do fundamentally. As I've said multiple times on the channel, I don't think crypto being a partisan thing is a good move strategically. That just is not a winning combination. Any industry that kind of relies on one president or another to be elected, like, is probably sitting in a pretty precarious spot, and is not something that like is good for longevity, at least if you ask me. So anyway, that's kind of how the chart's looking so far. Honestly, looking fantastic. There's a lot coming in here soon, I think, and it might be time to buckle up, because I think, depending on what happens before the end of this year, I think we could pretty comfortably be seeing six figures on Bitcoin. And I think there's a lot of people who might even say that might be a little bit of a bearish take. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. If you do want to trade as we kind of go through all of this, you're welcome to use my link on Margex. I actually have started trading recently as on this price movement up. I did take a long here yesterday as we started to break this resistance, and then I was able to secure some here, and then I set some that actually hit break-even stop loss, just because we did kind of see this wick down. But overall, we are continuing to see a lot of bullish momentum. So as we see a possibility of that continuing to the upside, maybe I'll enter another long. Or if we see that we might be coming down to like this level of support, then maybe I'll be taking a short. Right now I'm just kind of looking for like a point of maximum risk reward. So if this is something you're interested in doing, feel free to sign up for Margex. There's no KYC, no VPN, so you can protect all your personal information. You don't have to be giving that away to anybody, and also you can just get signed up and start trading. You also can do up to 100x leverage, and they've got a $10,000 deposit bonus as you get signed up. So anyway, if that's something you're interested in, feel free to check my description and link below. Now, what I want to talk about kind of transitioning into altcoin season on Bitcoin potentially, a lot of you might be saying, oh, well, what does that even mean? How do you even have altcoin season on Bitcoin, right? And a lot of what's been happening is layer 2 development and inscriptions and ordinals and all of this type of stuff that has happened with a recent Bitcoin update. It was the Taproot update. This allowed for a lot more stuff to be able to happen on Bitcoin. And so one of these projects, there's been a ton, right? We've seen like Merlin Chain, we've seen Stacks, we've seen, I think there's like Alex Labs is another one. There's a whole bunch of different like Bitcoin layer 2s, and there's actually, if you go to CoinGecko, you can actually see that there is a Bitcoin ecosystem category, so you can see a lot of those. They have their own runes protocol, and that effectively is meme coins on Bitcoin. There are some kind of technical limitations that make it not as like clean or smooth as you could say, like compared to Solana, but they do still have their own meme coins. I do think as we start to see some of those tech improvements, we will very likely see Bitcoin run, just because it's Bitcoin, right? Like that kind of, what else do you need to know as far as like a pitch or a narrative is concerned? So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of take a look at like, well, what could a Bitcoin led altcoin season look like? And one of the ones that we've seen and we have talked about on the channel previously is Tap Protocol. And Tap Protocol is pretty interesting because what it essentially allows for is it allows for development on the Bitcoin layer 1. And you might think, well, how do you do that when, Bitcoin's slow, it's got low time to finality, it's got low throughput, it's got a lot of that stuff. And what's interesting is they actually utilize essentially like the foundation of internet computer and its ability to like create smart contracts and then essentially like API into the Bitcoin ecosystem. That's essentially how they're allowing and enabling this to happen. Now, Tap protocols is kind of a larger ecosystem. It's called the Trac ecosystem. And so we'll go into this a little bit here in a second, but what I want to go over is kind of recent price performance and how Trac is done. Trac actually just released, I think just over a week ago at this point. What we can see is price has been relatively stable. It's actually started to kind of fall down a little bit from kind of where the release price was. Those who got into there was a pre-sale about 3 or 4 months back, that was about $3.50. So, it's been kind of, I guess aside from this drop that it came down here, it's held relatively close to about 2x from what that was. I would imagine we'll continue to see a lot of volatility, but ultimately I think this could be a project that does considerably well because it enables essentially layer 1 opportunities for development, and that's what's really important, at least in my mind. So that's something that we're going to take a look at right now. There is this article that's posted on OKX. It is actually pretty nice because it goes over kind of a quick overview of what the Tap protocol is, what the Trac ecosystem does, how this all kind of fits within Bitcoin ordinals, even just a super high level of what Bitcoin ordinals is, a lot of that type of stuff. So I figured it'd be worthwhile to kind of read through this, go through this article and kind of highlight some of the more important items that we are seeing from the Tap protocol and how it could actually be one of the major winners of this next bull run. Essentially, the TLDR, in addition to what we'll be reading here, is that all of this is enabled on layer 1 because a lot of what the other developers on Bitcoin are trying to do is they're trying to kind of go the Ethereum route and do a layer 2 so they can take a lot of these transactions off the layer 1 chain and move it down so the time to finality is easier and the fees are lower, and a lot of that type of stuff can be adjusted that you can't necessarily do on the layer 1. So what we can see with Tap protocol though is it has its own token, the Tap token, which essentially allows you to transfer assets within the ordinals ecosystem. There is also multiple protocol, or I guess you could say sub protocols that are kind of tied into Tap. So Tap essentially is kind of one of multiple. There's also the Pipe protocol, and the Pipe protocol is focused more on NFTs and things like that, but it's catered more toward Bitcoin's UXTO structure, which isn't necessarily super common in some of these others, advanced blockchains, I guess you could say. And so that's one of the big things that Tap is focusing on it and kind of working around. So what is Tap protocol, and essentially what is it trying to do? Now, obviously, if you are interested, like I said, go to OKX. You can find this whole article that explains a lot of what this does. There's a couple things I want to focus on particularly. So within the Bitcoin ecosystem, there is BRC20, and that's kind of the fungible token standard for Bitcoin. However, BRC20 presents a couple key issues, mainly because of the UXTO standard. So since the UXTO standard and how Bitcoin is kind of formed, you have to actually inscribe information on particular satoshis. And satoshis, if you think Bitcoin is $1, satoshis are kind of the pennies. And so what you have to do is you have to inscribe information on these particular satoshis or UXTOs, and what that now contains the information that you wanted, right? So if you want to buy 1,000 Tap tokens using BRC20, which is not possible, this is just kind of an example, what you would essentially buy 1,000, and then now that you have this inscription of 1,000 on a UXTO, if you want to sell 1,000, you either need to sell all 1,000, or you essentially need to split that UXTO up into smaller bite-sized pieces. So for example, if you wanted to sell 10, you could split it so you've got 990 left over and then 10, and then you would sell that UXTO with 10 on it. Or you could split it into 10 sets of 100 or 100 sets of 10, however you wanted to do that. But this obviously all it takes fees and stuff to do that. And so that's where Tap comes in, is because what this does is it is on Bitcoin layer 1, but it uses an indexer to essentially keep track of all this stuff, not necessarily directly using inscriptions on chain. So that's kind of the key difference here between Tap and BRC20. The other thing, if we go down and take a look, we can see further on in the article is kind of what differentiates Tap between BRC20. This is kind of a nice way that if you're familiar with BRC20, that's like this is already going to make a lot of sense to you. If you're not familiar with either, this may help also if you just want to go to this article and read about it. But there is a lot, probably more prevalent information on BRC20, just because this is kind of, at least up until this point, been the preeminent like protocol on Bitcoin. And so this could be a good way to like help you kind of figure out the differences between them. And so what we can see is the first one is like there's enhanced functionality in the Tap protocol versus BRC20. And so what we can see is that Tap protocol was created to provide more extensive features in BRC20. It has the designation to change addresses and restricts multi-sending within a single transaction, making it more compatible with Bitcoin's UXTO structure and facilitating multi-sending capabilities. So this has been something that was kind of a problem, or I guess like a difficulty using BRC20, is because if you wanted to like do an airdrop, for example, it would be really, really expensive because you could usually only send, 1,000 transactions at a time or 100 transactions at a time. And obviously you were paying the gas fees on Bitcoin for that every single time. And it was very, very expensive to do. Where a Tap protocol, you could send it all out at once. Everybody gets their airdrop or whatever, their mass distribution of whatever you're doing, and then it's done. And it's a lot simpler, it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot faster. The other thing is it's hooked into like the Trac ecosystem. And so Tap protocol is essentially like one subset of the Trac ecosystem, which also encompasses Trac Core and Pipe protocol. Trac Core is essentially like the gateway to Bitcoin information, functioning as like the Bitcoin Oracle. You could also maybe even think about like a data availability provider if you were familiar with like Ethereum and how its layer 2s work. Also, Pipe protocol expands the transaction capabilities to include digital art, NFTs, and inscriptions, all within like the structure of Bitcoin's UXTO model. So you could think of as like Tap is like the fungibles side of the coin, Pipe is like the non-fungible side of the coin, and then Trac is kind of what ties it all together, is more of like the DA like aggregator, or like the relayer between layer 1 and what's happening on like within the Trac ecosystem. So what we can also see is the BRC20 tokens were introduced after Bitcoin's Taproot update, and this update increased the block data capacity and brought in like the ordinals protocol, which is essentially like inscribing on particular satoshis. The Taproot update made it possible to create semi-fungible tokens using inscriptions on the Bitcoin network. And so this is essentially how BRC20 works, is they're kind of shoehorning fungible tokens into inscriptions, kind of via like how I explained earlier. If you want to buy 1,000, then you essentially write 1,000 on a piece of paper, and then you keep that piece of paper. So that's kind of why they call it like semi-fungibles, is because they're technically all the same, but they're not like, you can't take 0.1 and sell it off if you have like a block of 1,000. So that's kind of like the easiest way to kind of think about that. Also, functionality and applications. We can see that BRC tokens allow for basic token functions like deployment, minting, transferring, stuff like that. Tap protocol supports a wider range that essentially allows more complex transactions. This is essentially getting us closer to like the standard smart contract type of format that you would expect to see. And then also with the popularity, you can see despite its initial success in attracting new users through collections and ordinal inscriptions, BRC20 faces competition from Tap protocol. Tap protocol offers advanced features and capabilities that appeal to developers and users seeking versatile applications. Its integration within the Trac ecosystem further enhances its appeal. And then also you've got smart contracts and token fungibility. The BRC20 tokens are different from Ethereum's ERC tokens. They don't use smart contracts and are considered semi-fungible. This is because of the Bitcoin blockchain, and it has like limited programmability. And so essentially what Tap protocol is doing is like looking to kind of move away from that and give a lot more like traditional smart contract DeFi functionality that we would generally expect to see using this type of software and this type of technology. So anyway, that's kind of a quick overview of Tap protocol. As you can see, like what it does on Bitcoin, like Bitcoin's already seen a pretty, I would say, a fairly impressive like adoption rate of what's actually going on within the ecosystem. And so having tech implementations and tech upgrades that like will make the usability and the functionality that much more relevant and useful is actually like, it's a huge deal because we've already seen so much success. And so now actually like essentially bringing it up to the point where it's not like really difficult to do anything on chain, that's a really, really big improvement, and something that I think could potentially kind of push some of that like pent up like volume and interest and things like that we've seen kind of spread throughout the altcoin ecosystem, and it could focus it directly in Bitcoin. And especially if people really like Bitcoin, something obviously many of you are aware of, like within the Bitcoin community, everybody cares about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is kind of where everything begins and ends. And so if people can take their Bitcoin gains and stay within Bitcoin to speculate to make more Bitcoin, like I think that's a pretty strong and compelling reason as to why people would kind of want to stay within that ecosystem. So that's kind of why I'm thinking that we could see altcoin season maybe stay. I wouldn't think it would be limited solely to Bitcoin, but it could like essentially kind of suck a lot of the air out of the room from a lot of the other altcoins, just because there is already this functionality, and it's continuing to mature and it's continuing to get built out within the Bitcoin ecosystem. So anyway, hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you did, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me out. Also, if you have any comments, questions, anything like that, please feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I do try to read and respond to all of them. So if there is something that you want me to see, that would be the best way to do that. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.